All right, good morning. All right, let me see if I can unhook this. I'm actually delighted to be here, for many different reasons. First off, that meeting 5 years ago, the thing that was so neat about that meeting 5 years ago is that Ron Powell actually right then listened, and he's got this way of listening. If you've been in a room with him, when you actually say something that he thinks is relevant and important, he actually stops and looks at you and you think, oh my gosh, I better get that right. The thing that I was so impressed by is not that people were excited about PBIS, because that was still fairly new. The real issue was that everybody in the room was really committed to improving things for kids. I mean, Sherry, that was a very gracious introduction. But the thing I want you to be excited about, I want you to be excited about what you see as change in families and kids within your district and within your areas. Part of it, I mean, in this part of California, you've got some significant challenges. And I come here, you know, it's great. The part about being a professor and doing things is great, but the real thing that I want you to listen to is the fact that I was a teacher. I was a teacher for a long time. I worked with kids, and I worked with kids that really taught me a lot about what works and what doesn't work. I also worked with kids where very often I would send them home into situations that just broke your heart. And you know that we've got to be able to do things better for kids. Part of what you are doing, part of what PBIS is really all about is about creating that island of sanity, that island of safety, that set of context where kids are able to be successful, and building on that, not just socially, but also academically, so that we're able to get kids in a much more effective context in future. So I'm really pleased in part because what I see happening in Desert Mountain is what is so critical, and many of you, I'm looking out, I actually can see you. I can tell that some of you have been in education for a while. All right? And I got to tell you, I mean, think about one of the things we all bring. Think about the number of initiatives, the number of directions, the number of, you know, we want you to try this program that got started and then fizzled out. Too often, we're asked to sweat blood and make something happen only to have it go away the next year. PBIS is something that's going to sustain. Part of what I really want you to take away today, I want you to take away not just where we are right now, I want you to feel very, very positive about what you've accomplished, but everybody should leave these next couple days with a sense of trajectory for where you're headed. Now, Sherry did the piece about saying who's been using PBIS. How many of you have been doing it for only about a year? How many of you are in your first year? Okay, how many 2 years, two to 5? Great. Anybody doing it more than 5? All right. So part of what I'm interested in doing today, right, between now and 10:30, one, I want you to feel pretty good about what you've accomplished so far. 2, for those of you who are in the exploration stage, you're looking, bless you, you're looking at, is this something that we really should be thinking of? I want you to be thinking not, is school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports something that works? I want you to think about whether it fits your school. So let's come back over and over again to that whole sense of why would we do this? How does it fit, and what would really be involved? For those of you who have been doing it for a little while, one of the things you're doing is you're moving beyond just the Tier 1 support. You're moving into Tier 2 and Tier 3. And in fact, I'd like to hear some of you, those of you who have already doing things, you should know your behavioral expectations, right? So who's somebody who can offer, what are the behavioral expectations in your school? Yes, please. Responsible, safe, respectful. Operational, 3 to 5, positively stated, brilliant. Brilliant. One more. Anybody else? Yes, please.
We're still in high school, and our expectations are that students show integrity, honor self and others, and have social responsibility.
social responsibility, integrity, and honor self and others, right? Now, the thing I love about this is she prefaced that, those of you who couldn't hear, by saying that she's from a high school. The really important and beautiful thing about that is you've got to map your expectations to the developmental level of the kids. You've got to map it to what they identify as things that would be useful. I love the idea about honoring others. Honoring others is a way of framing being respectful in a manner that is much more consistent with what your kids are going to be interested in. Nice job. The other thing I want you to do, so one, those of you who are new, here's what I want you to be able to do. What is school-wide positive behavior support? Why would we want to put it in place, and what does it take? Okay, so those are the things I really want you to take away. For those of you who are already doing PBIS, one of the things you know is that it's a multi-tiered system. So you do the initial things for everybody, you do more for those kids who need a little bit, and then you've got higher intensity supports for those kids who need a lot. One of the things that is great about this particular conference or forum is I want you to think about the three keys: positive behavior support, mental health, parent and family. Part of what we know is you definitely are not going to reach those kids who need the most intense support just by doing academics or just by doing basic behavioral. Linking in the community mental health, tying and working closely with the family and the community is going to be essential for those kids with the more intense needs. PBIS is not a piece. PBIS is a comprehensive strategy for integrating things that are going to work for all kids. If we're going to do that well, though, we've got to do it in a way that actually sustains. Now, the things I want you to worry about, I want you to put things in place that will last, and last for a minimum of 10 years. So everything that you hear at this conference, I want you to be thinking, how would we put that in place, not so that we could do it for the end of this academic year, how can we put it in place so it'll last for a minimum of a decade? If you use that as the perspective, part of what you do is you say, how do we do it? How do we have the systems that make it work? And how do we have the data that will allow it to continue to adapt and improve? And I've got to say, one of the things that you do well in Desert Mountain, and one of the things you're doing better in many of the actual districts, is you're using data for decision making. Data is not just something that you send away into the ether space of administrivia, right? It actually is something that you can use. So, three big things. Thing number one, for those of you who are new to PBIS, I want you to really leave at 10:30 with what is it, why should we do it, and how does it work? For those of you who are already launched and going, how do we take it to the next level? How do we get the tier 2 and tier 3 supports? And I want you to take away a couple of ideas. One about how to link with academics, another about how to invest within bully prevention systems. The other thing I want you to be thinking about is how, and I added a couple of slides, to look at how we bring families in, not just when we have problems, but where we bring families in early on. So those are things I want you to take away. For those of you who are administrators, I really want you to pay special attention to the issues related to sustainability. My father was the superintendent of schools in David Douglas School District in Oregon. So I bear all the scars of being the son of the superintendent, but I also come away with a real appreciation for what it means to lead a complex educational system where you're getting both guidance from families, guidance from the feds, guidance from the state, and guidance from your school board. That, in fact, in many ways, those of you who are sitting here and you're looking at your building administrator or district administrator, take good care of them, all right? Being an education administrator right now is really close to being a self-injurious behavior. So I mean, I want to look at people doing a little bit better. All right, so here we go. You ready? Let's rock and roll now. One, I really want you to come away with the idea of why do we want to think about doing school-wide behavior support. School-wide positive behavior support is the development of a social culture that makes the school a more effective learning environment. Everything we're talking about is about making the school a more effective learning environment. And one of the great things that I get to do as a university professor is we get to do research looking at what works, what doesn't work, where does something work, what do you do to make it work more effectively. And I work very, very closely with a series of graduate students who are very, very talented, very, very smart, work very hard for almost nothing. I recommend you all get one, all right? But the things that I can do, I'm going to share a little bit of research, the results that we've got, but if I were to condense the last 45 years of educational research, if you want to create a school that is a really effective learning environment, do this. Make it a highly predictable setting. Every kid walking into the school should be able to identify what the expectations are. What is the roadmap to being successful? Make the school a highly predictable social context for all kids, not just for those who come from two-parent families, but those who come with some odd assumptions about the way the world works. Second, make it consistent. So don't have things do one way in Hall A and another way in Hall B. Don't have it be everybody's got to toe the line for Mr. Elliott, but basically you can do anything you want for Mr. Emmett. Make things much more consistent across time, place, and people. The reason you do that is not for us, it's for the kids. Make the students enter an environment where they feel safe. If they feel safe, then they're going to be in a physical situation where they're going to be much more responsive to educational instruction. Kids who are tense, kids who are emotionally excited, are in a physiological state that actually decreases the likelihood they're going to take in information and learn. So create environments that are predictable and consistent, excuse me, make it safe. And the other part is really focus on proactive, positive efforts. Don't just hold the positive as, if you're good for about 4 years, we'll let you graduate. It's provide ways where on a regular basis you're getting tickets that will lead to baskets of goodies. Find ways where on a regular basis kids get the corrective feedback that says, that's the right way to do it. That's helpful. This works. If you do that, you can really make an environment that works. Now, PBIS, the thing that is slightly different about PBIS from many other programs that you've been part of, the whole goal in PBIS is to bring the students into the system. We want to change the way that students interact with each other. If you do PBIS well, kids expect each other to behave well. They don't just say, well, I'm doing this for the adults. They actually expect each other to behave well. Now, for those of you who are thinking about PBIS, I want you to say, here are 3 reasons why I want you to be excited about it. First, it actually works. PBIS is actually functionally related to reduction in problem behavior and increase in academic outcomes. Schools that implement PBIS well, not just go to training, all right? Going to training is cute, but it's not enough, right? If you actually implement PBIS, you'll get a 20 to 60% reduction in office discipline referrals. You'll get reduction in out-of-school suspensions. You'll get an increase in the extent to which you get students academically engaged. All right? So one of the reasons that I want you to be interested in this is it actually changes kid behavior. Second, and this is something I want you especially to worry about. I've looked at your data, and I've looked both at data in California in general and in data in different districts. We have a challenge within education right now, and especially with the fiscal things that are occurring across the nation. I'm worried. I'm worried that too often we're going to allow education to be something that's only accessed by those people with resources. I want you to be interested in PBIS because it increases the equity with which quality education is delivered. And come on, you all have been in many, think about this. I want you to think about the meetings you've been in where we look at this student. We say, you know, Doris is a really wonderful student. We really like her. She has lots of things that she does well. She has a wonderful smile. She dresses well. We really like her. We're looking for a place that would be appropriate for her, just preferably very far from us. You ever been in one of those meetings? All right. I want you to be interested in PBIS, because PBIS makes education, quality education, more accessible to a wider range of kids. Thank you, Sherry. Third thing, and this again, those of you who are administrators, I want you to be interested in PBIS because it's going to improve efficiency. PBIS is actually cost-effective and efficient. We've actually worked with economists and we've built the issues. The time that you all spend engaging and implementing PBIS actually comes back in savings in both teacher time and student time. So those are the three pieces. Now, one of the things I want you to do, you're all going to stop and say, aha, can you actually show me the data in which that actually works? Well, here are the randomized control trials documenting that school-wide positive behavior support is actually effective. By lunch, we expect you to have read all of these and have mastered hierarchical linear modeling, so you're actually able to put that in place. But in the event that you haven't gone online and downloaded each of these studies, here's essentially what it says. If you implement school-wide positive behavior support, okay, not just go to training, but you actually put it in place. And put it in place means that you have a team checklist score, a benchmark of quality score, or a set score indicating fidelity. So you can go online and you can, at no cost, as a team, assess how you're doing. If you implement the elements to criteria, here's what you get. You get a 20 to 60% reduction in office discipline referrals. Kids behave better. Second, you get an increase, not just in student engagement, but in actual academic performance. We actually have data documenting that, especially in elementary schools, we get increases in both standardized tests and in progress monitoring. Third, the kids actually show up in high school. I'm going to show you the data from California in just a minute. One of the big deals we've got in high school is they stop coming. It's much more difficult to do effective education if they're not there. All right, safety. The kids and the adults identify the school as a safer place when you implement school-wide positive behavior support. Those of you concerned about bullying behaviors, and bullying behaviors, by the way, are the single most focused on problem that the students identify. Not that we identify, but that the students identify as something to focus on. It also will increase the organizational efficiency, decrease staff turnover, and a really interesting thing that we've just recently published. Schools that implement PBIS have teachers who identify themselves as being more effective. They build the social emotional skills of kids, but the teachers actually identify themselves as being more effective. Let me show you in a quick example. This is a study done by a guy named Scott Ross at University of Utah. And what he looked at is he looked at 20 schools that were implementing PBIS, 20 elementary schools implementing PBIS, and 20 elementary schools that were not. So they were matched for size, for SES, for free and reduced lunch proportion, for proportion of kids on IEPs. So they were schools that were similar. The really only difference was that 20 of them had over the previous 2 years adopted PBIS. With each of those schools, we randomly selected 5 teachers. And those teachers took 2 surveys. One was called the Mashlock Burnout Inventory. You'll love this, right? Anybody who's in education loves the Mashlock Burnout Inventory. And it's a very standardized, big instrument that's used, and it focuses on 3 things: the extent to which you are emotionally exhausted, the extent to which the environment is depersonalizing, and the one we were really interested in the extent to which you as a person in an organization perceive yourself as accomplishing things, as getting things done. The second measure is called the teacher efficacy scale. And that again is a measure of whether you as an educator perceive yourself as being effective. So think for a minute just right now, 1 to 10 scale. How effective do you think you're being as an educator with your kids in your system? So those are the two scales. Now when we compared the data from teachers using PBIS, so we've got about 100 people, comparing people who use PBIS and people who don't, we get something that looks like this. So this is the rating of teacher efficacy. The bar on the right is for schools that are using PBIS. The bar on the left were for schools that were not. This is the extent to which you as an educator perceive yourself as being effective. All right? Now, for those of you who are excited, we used non-parametric chi-square, documented a statistically significant effect of 0.001 with an effect size of 0.43. For those of you who are less excited about that sort of stuff, the bar on the right is bigger. I mean, it's a whole lot bigger. As an administrator, one of the things I want you to ask yourself is, as an administrator, are we creating the organizational context where our people are effective? Part of the reason I want you to be excited about PBIS is because PBIS is a strategy for actually increasing the effectiveness of teachers. Now, I also wanted to talk about the issue of equity. This is a sort of a difficult slide, but what I want you to look at, hang in there with me, because each slide has a story. And this story of this one goes this way. The bottom axis from the left to the right is the extent to which teachers and the schools are using PBIS. So this is low use, this is high use. The vertical axis is the extent to which the teachers perceive themselves as being effective. Not effective, very effective. Each dot is a school. So this dot is a school where the teachers perceive themselves as both being very effective and using PBIS. Down here, this is a dot where they are not using PBIS and do not see themselves as being effective. The dots are divided into three groups. See the blue line, the green line, and the red line. The blue line is from schools that come from high socioeconomic status environments. So these are high SES settings. The green is moderate, the red is low socioeconomic settings. So here's the way the story goes. You ready? The story goes like this. Teachers who are working in schools where the kids come from a high SES community perceive themselves as being very effective teachers, whether they use PBIS or not. They just think, we are doing a great job, we got a lot of stuff going on. But if the teachers are in schools that come from moderate to low socioeconomic settings, there is a giant difference. Giant difference. See this down? This is very low, this is very high. Big difference on whether they use PBIS. So one of the reasons, those of you who are thinking about doing this, I want you to be interested because first and foremost, PBIS is focused on creating schools that are more effective learning environments. Second, schools are environments in which the teachers perceive themselves as doing things better. And third, if you do it well, PBIS creates a setting that's more inclusive. Too often in education, we like to draw a circle and we say, come on now, people are cutting back our funding, we have fewer adults in the school, we're not able to be as dynamic as we once were. We can work with these kids. We can be effective with these kids. But we've all been in that situation where we say, well, you know, People who do these sorts of odd behaviors, maybe they're outside the circle. People who really have difficulty learning, maybe they're outside the circle. People who are a little troubled emotionally, maybe outside our circle. People who engage in behaviors that put other kids at risk, maybe outside our circle. I want you to be interested in PBIS. I want you to be interested in PBIS because it makes the circle bigger and it draws these kids in. I want you to be committed. If you really are focused on the 3 keys, you're focused on behavior support, mental health, parent and family, you are focused on your community and all the kids in your community. Part of the reason that I want you to be interested in PBIS is because it makes schools effective for a larger proportion of your kids. The other piece, we're not doing this just out of, oh, we think this would be a good idea. We actually do this because it's efficient. Here's a little bit of data. So this is a cost analysis that we did a while ago, and we were looking at amount of time that administrators, teachers, and students spend. A thing I want you to worry about, problem behavior is expensive. Discipline is expensive. And it takes about 45 minutes out of a student's day to go through referrals. It takes about 30 minutes for an administrator and 15 minutes for a teacher. And we got those numbers by looking at median data from Maryland and Florida. But if you use, your numbers might be a little greater, a little less. It depends whether you're talking about suspensions or expulsions. But consider this. Here's one middle school in Oregon. So Kennedy Middle School, the first year when we first started interacting, and they were in those of you who raised your hand and said we're trying to get and be interested, they were in the point where they had about 1,300 office discipline referrals. The first year that they started implementing, they reduced a little bit. Second year, quite a bit more. Third year, they actually met criteria. It took them about 2 years to actually reach the implementation criterion. So they got a reduction in office discipline referrals and thought, wow, hot spit, that's great, all right? But what did that actually translate into? That reduction in office discipline referrals and suspensions translated into a savings of administrator time, building administrator time, of 29 8-hour days. Now I know administrators work more than 8 hours, but just cut me a little slack here for the demonstration. I want you to worry. One of the problems you're going to have if you implement PBIS is your administrators are going to have to find something else to do. All right? Now I don't think that's going to be a big problem, but I want you to worry about that. The other thing I want you to see, look on the right. This is a middle school. This is a middle school. Implementing PBIS resulted in a savings of 121 full student days of academic instruction. There is no variable more powerful for change in the academic outcomes of your kids than if they're actually receiving effective instruction. One of the things that PBIS does is it increases the likelihood they're there. Second thing it does is it increases the likelihood that if they're there, they'll pay attention. Those are big deals. So now, remember those of you who are getting used to and thinking about this, one of the things that I promised is why would you be interested in it? The short answer, you'd be interested, 1, because it works to achieve student outcomes, 2, because it's equitable. It increases the equity with which we deliver effective instruction, and 3, because it's cost effective. Now, the second part is, well, what is it really? So there's a guy, and Sherry talked about George Sugai. George is actually a product of California. He was raised in Los Gatos, and he is now a professor at the University of Connecticut, but he and I have worked together for about 20 years. Part of what George really gave us, and this is really a gift, an important gift, is he said these things. If you want to create a more effective learning environment, 1, the social culture matters. Social culture refers to the extent to which the students are part of the school community. And I'm going to come back and talk about that a little bit more. Second, and this is really important, 20 years ago, we were all taught to identify the kids who are having difficulty and intervene with those kids. We still do that. George's message is that's necessary and radically insufficient. Focus on the whole school first and focus proactively, which means I want you to create a predictable, consistent, positive, and safe environment before she makes problems. Rather than waiting until she's fouled up and then coming in, think about what we can do before she ever gets started. And do it with the whole school, not just with those kids who are difficult. The third thing that George really taught us, and this, quite frankly, is the hardest message, is he said, look, there are a lot of things that are really fun. I mean, we love to do the part about instruction. We love to do, what do they do when they use the F word, right? What is the things that we deal with for a child who's emotionally melting? We like the instruction and intervention part. What George said is, listen, the non-sexy stuff is the organizational pieces that actually lead to sustained and effective implementation. It's not good enough to make your classroom effective. Make the whole school effective and do it with the systems that'll make it last. How long? 10 years. All right. Now, that's not just a mantra. We actually have done that. We have schools that have been using PBIS with fidelity for over 15 years. And so this is not something we're just making up or coming up with as a pie in the sky. The last thing that George taught us is he said, from now on, whether you're doing math, reading, writing, or behavior, never implement with one level of intensity. Basically, let's understand and agree to a very, very important message. And that message is that the kids in our schools today are more different from each other than ever before. They're more different in their social expectations. They're more different in the extent to which they come ready to learn. They're more different in the extent to which they have the reading, math, writing skills. I mean, think about those of you who are in elementary schools, those kids who come to kindergarten having been read to for 3,000 hours versus those kids who come never having seen a book. Those are giant differences. We can't teach the same way to everybody. So part of what we're learning, we need to have at least 3 tiers of intensity. In behavior, start with the whole school and say everybody will have a universal set of behavior supports. Now this is really interesting. Everybody gets behavior support. Not just those kids who have problems, but everybody. Because it's not just about Mary Ellen or Dolores or Eric. It's about creating a social community that the kids feel part of. Everybody gets behavior support. Those people who need a little bit more, they don't need 35 of us to come together and do massive scales and genuflect over a 85-page report. All right? What they need is a little bit of extra help. And as administrators, come on, you all know we have too often invested way too much when a small intervention would work. So I want you to have something that's efficient and works. And then for the 3% of kids whose mission in life is to maintain our humility, I want you to really have the organizational systems so that you can pull together the mental health, the family support, the academic, in some cases, the medical, in addition to the behavioral systems that'll actually make things work. Multi-tiered systems are critical. So what George did is he said, okay, come on, if we're going to make that happen, what are the things that we really need to do? First off, PBIS is not a program. PBIS is not a model. PBIS is a framework for creating a core set of evidence-based practices. Those practices are all focused around creating this notion of a school-wide social culture. So PBIS is a framework that pulls together a set of things. You can use Safe and Civil Schools to get started, you can use BEST to get started, but I want the full constellation of instruction, classroom systems, non-classroom systems, data systems, teaming structure, so that you put something in place that not only produces a brief change, but actually produces something that's durable. So if we do that, build the social culture with the additional behavior supports that make the school an effective learning environment for all. Here's what we've learned. Tier 1. If you're going to do this, focus first on prevention. If you start by waiting, we've not been successful. Start by saying, what would be the critical features in an elementary school, in a middle school, in a high school? If you were to walk into a school and say, are we implementing PBIS? How would you know? I want you to be able to tell within 5 minutes of whether you're doing Tier 1, the basic universal level of PBIS. Part of what that's going to look like is I want everybody to know what the behavioral expectations are. So define and teach the behavioral expectations. And we do a great job of defining stuff. I mean, the first middle school that I went to, we were sort of going through this, and they said, okay, we've done that. We've defined the expectations. I said, fantastic, wow, what are they? They said, well, they're in the discipline handbook. I said, oh, great, well, what are they? I said, well, you know, there's a list, it's in the discipline handbook. And I said, well, and the kids know this. Oh, yes, they all have to sign at the beginning of the year. And I said, boy, that's great. Your attorney probably loves that. But do they actually know the expectations, and what are they? And so I said, do you have the discipline handbook? And they said, well, yeah, we do have one somewhere. I said, do you know what the expectations are? And nobody was able to raise their hand and say, yep. And it turns out they had 38 expectations, you know? And the expectations were no hitting, no kicking, no spitting, no gum, no biting, no throwing, no rape, no pillage. I mean, it was a list of things not to do. Look, I got to tell you, anybody who believes they can come up with the full list of things that middle school students shouldn't do is in a mythology arena, all right? And the thing I love best, I mean, I work with neuroscientists, and with a middle school student, if you actually say things like no hats, what flashes in their brain, right? You get hats all over the brain. And in fact, if you're a middle school student and you say no hats, the first thing, well, what about scarves? What about caps? Is a cap a hat? What about a yarmulke? Right, I can't wear right? And it's like, how close can I possibly get? And it's not that they're just being reprehensible wretches. It's that it's actually part, I mean, you get that sense. I mean, come on, I'm a teacher too. We all have those times when we wish we hadn't. The point I want you to get at is I want you to think we set them up when we do that. So when you teach behavioral expectations, you teach them what you want them to do. And we want to create the idea, Cowboy, I am here to help you to be successful. I'm here to give you the roadmap to how to make it work. I'm not the behavioral cop, right? I'm not the behavioral cop. And if we put that stuff in place, you're going to get things that work better. Now, part of what I worry a little bit, all that stuff about, you know, positive this, positive that, people get the idea that there aren't actually consequences for doing things the wrong way, and that's not true. We are big fans of the message that you do in fact have consequences for behaving badly. But those consequences are not meant to sort of humiliate you. They're meant to give you a clear message, sweetheart, that was not being respectful. And let's go through what being respectful really looks like. The consequences are instructional. The consequences prevent things from escalating. The consequences are a way of avoiding some of the conflict that you get into with teachers. If you're an administrator, one of the things I love is we actually have done videotapes of situations where teachers and kids were in conflict, and you watch the kid does something wrong and the teacher says, don't do that. And the kid says, well, but it's okay. Teacher says, no, it's not. Kid says, you're not my boss. Kid says, or the teacher says, yes, I am. The kid says, well, F you. The teacher says, you go and stand in the corner. And kid says, I'm going to go and stand in the corner and masturbate. And then, and so then but then as an administrator, think, you get the office referral and it says, Eric behaved in a rude and disruptive manner and escalated until he was emotionally out of control. Hey, listen, I've looked at the videos, and Eric was not out of control at all. He was having a great time. All right? In fact, you could sort of see Eric bouncing around, and he was doing his part, and then the teacher would say his part, then he would do his part, and then the teacher would do it, and Eric would say something outrageous and then go, your turn. I mean, seriously, right? You got to be careful. The reason you use consequences, one of the reasons, I want you to break that interaction pattern, that escalation pattern. So you use consequences, you don't use consequences to change the behavior. You use the consequences to say, this is not it, this is what you should do, avoid escalation, and break that destructive kid-peer interaction. To change the kid's behavior, define, teach, monitor, and reward what you want. If you do those two things together, you get change. Too often, we try and only change things with consequences. And the result is we use more and more and more intense consequences. And we've all been there. You think about some situations you've been in where you gave the correct response, kid did not respond, you weren't quite sure what to do. So one of the things that you did was you said it louder, right? And there are variations of that. It's sort of like if all you've got's a hammer, you treat everything like a nail, and if the nail doesn't go down, you use a bigger and bigger hammer. Okay, look, PBIS. PBIS gives your people more tools. It decreases the likelihood that they're going to be controlling behavior with big hammers. It decreases the likelihood that we're going to be in one of those situations where the newspaper comes in and we get the publicity we don't want. High frequency problem behavior kids will, over time, if you do not give your staff their necessary supports, they will train us to act in ways that we don't like. All right? So PBIS is first and foremost for the kids. It's also for the families, but it's also for the staff. One of the other things that George taught us is he said, okay, you've got rewards, you've got consequences, you've got this multi-tiered system that works, but the underlying structure that'll make it endure is by collecting and using data. Now and I want you to write this down. Everybody in education hears data, 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 data. Most of the time, it's all about student data. I want you to know, what is the office discipline referral rate for your school? How many kids are sent to the office for behaving badly on average each day? And how does that compare with national norms? If you don't know that, I want you to feel just a little bit sad. I want you to take 13 milliseconds, feel sad. Okay, now, the second thing I want you to know, those of you who are implementing PBIS, I want you to be able to say, to what extent are we implementing with fidelity? So you should be able to say, what is our team checklist score? Do we have 80% on the team checklist, 70% on the benchmark of quality, 80% on the set? And those of you who are moving into the tier 2 and tier 3, we've got measures you can do for that too. These are things that are free. They cost nothing other than about 15 minutes of staff time to do. That's part of what George taught us. And he taught us if we do that well, we will actually build this social culture. Now here's the definition of a social culture. And sociologists and anthropologists have lots of input on this, but for us, here's what I want you to think about. You have built a social culture when your kids have three things. Thing number one, everybody's got a common language. So everybody knows, be respectful, be responsible, be safe. When you say students in our high school honor each other, they've got to know what that means. They've got to know that honor is a word every single kid in the school has got. Give people the language, the words that they attach to. The second part, though, is the words alone are not enough. We've got many social skills programs that talk about pillars of this and dynamos of this, and they talk about the words. The thing I want you to do is to transform the words into real behavior. So the student needs to be able to say, if I walk into your school and I walk down the hall and I stop some kids and I say, kid, what are the behavioral expectations here? And whatever's the developmentally appropriate way of asking that question. The kids in your school would say, be respectful, be responsible, be safe. The next question you ask is, what does that mean right here? Wherever we are we on the playground, if we're in the hallway, or we're in the classroom, what does it mean? What do you do? How would you know if I was doing it, not doing it? When you have taught the behavioral expectations, they not only can repeat the words back, they actually know the difference. And the fascinating thing is if you teach being respectful in the hall, in the cafeteria, in the bus, in the gym, you do it at least 3 different places, they will be able to generalize to a wide range of settings. What a powerful life skill to have taught. The third thing I want you to do, and this is the one that really makes it kick. Every kid knows the words, they know the expectations. The third part is they know that everybody else knows. You have created community when everybody knows that everybody knows. The reason why you do behavior support for everybody is I want each kid to be confident, both that she knows what the expectations are, and she knows that every other kid knows the expectations. I was in Fern Ridge Middle School, and it was actually about January. And I was in the principal's office, and we were planning for the next PBIS meeting, and these 2 girls came in middle school girls have this face of outrage and indignation that you can't really mimic well. But they came in and they explained to the principal that there were 2 new girls who did not know how to behave. And I love that. I love it because not only did they know it, they were outraged that the school administration had been so incompetent as to have new people come in and not get trained up. And then the thing I love best is the principal said, you are absolutely right. That is something that we really need to deal with. Here's what I'd like you to do. I am empowering the 2 of you to work with these girls and walk them through and I'll come down and I'll explain that in a little bit. And she did that, and they wanted badges, and so we had to say no badges. But you get the basic idea? All right. The thing is, I want you to create a situation where the kids expect appropriate behavior from each other. And one of the things that is not well represented in the research is every time we survey the students, when we survey the students and we say, okay, you've been in PBIS, right? We can actually document that you're behaving better and your academics have gone up and you feel safer and all that. But basically, come on, cowboy, do you really know what's going on here? And is this a good thing? And how does it fit for you? The elementary school children are, and we haven't done it less than about 4th or 5th grade, are very positive. And but they're positive about almost everything. All right? The middle school students are great. We've done this about 10 times. And we go into the middle school and we ask these questions, and they say, I think this is a great idea. I think on a scale of 1 to 10, it's an 8.5 that you should do it next year. All right? Yes, I know the behavioral expectations, but I personally didn't need this. I think it is absolutely wonderful, however, that you have done it for the rest of the student body who are basically only minimally human. And I love this because it's almost, you know, you've seen the research where 87% of people think they're better than average drivers, right? In middle school, 87% of the kids think they're better than average behaviors. And in part, I love that. Capture that. Part of what we're learning. I want them to walk down the hall. I want them to walk down the hall with a level of confidence, not with a level of worry. I want them to be looking and saying, I know how to make this work. And when you implement PBIS, you walk into the school and you can tell the difference because the kids are comfortable, the kids are actively engaged, and one of the things that I always watch for the extent to which the kids approach adults versus move away from adults. In schools that use PBIS, the students actually identify us as assets, even in high school, which is tricky. All right, now one of the big issues is the one you can't do PBIS without having been exposed to the triangle. And one of the portions of my contract is I must show the triangle at least 4 times in every presentation. All right, but I worry about people just seeing the triangle so many times that they lose the real meaning. So for those of you who are experienced, I want you to join in when I get to the chorus. For those of you who are new, here's what this really means. The triangle always starts with only green. And what it means is, if you're going to build a social culture, start with everyone. Everybody's in the triangle. Everybody gets taught a predictable, consistent, positive, and safe structure. If you do that well, what we're learning is you're going to have about 15% of kids who need a little more help. Not a lot. They need more structure. They need more feedback. They don't need a giant amount of help, but they need some. And then you'll have those kids at the top who need wraparound supports. They need individualized, high-intensity support systems. And in part, it's reasonable for people to say, come on, is there any data that actually supports that mythology? So here are the data from the United States, from about 3,500 schools using PBIS and Swiss. For those of you who are data junkies, this is a graph that you can download off of the Swiss.org website. And part of what it says is how many office discipline referrals is the median for elementary schools, 3,310 elementary schools. If you took all the office referrals, divide by the number of kids, right, and then divide by the number of school days, you would get 0.22 per 100 kids. All right? Part of what it also looks like, here are the real triangles for a full year's worth of data. The one on the second from the left is the 3,300 elementary schools. The next is 972 middle schools and 477 high schools. Now, part of what we did here, the triangle indicates the green part are kids that have 0 or 1 referral for an entire year, all year, right? Yellow are kids who have 2 to 5. Red are kids who have 6 or more. Part of what we know is if you have 2 or more major office discipline referrals, that changes our expectations and trajectory. You got 6 or more, that's a really big problem. But partly, look at the elementary kids. See, there's about 2.5 in the red, 6.7 in the yellow. So you've got about 9% of the kids who are engaged in 2 or more office referrals. Those 9%, those of you who are administrators, those 9% account for how many, what proportion of all the problem behaviors? Those 9% represent 34% of all the high intensity problems. So part of what we get into is the kids who are instituting high instance problem behaviors are more and more engaged in a high proportion of all. So focusing on those kids is worthwhile. Now here's some data from California. I don't have the specific data from your 53 schools because I didn't have the specific names of the schools. But there are right now, this year, 531 schools in California implementing PBIS. 326 are actually using Swiss. When we look at the office discipline referrals, part of what we're looking at, this is what is happening for elementary schools. There's 202 elementary schools. The red bar is the national median. So California schools are actually doing better than the national median. Middle schools, California schools are doing better than the national median. High schools, well, we got some excitement in the high schools. We're still working on that. All right? But let's do a little bit. I want you to be thinking about what you're experiencing. So if someone were to say to you, what are the behaviors that are leading to problem behaviors in California? What are the behaviors that are leading to office discipline referrals? So here is, the little green bars are last year, the little blue bars are this year. So that gives you some consistency across time. The big issue is physical aggression. So in elementary schools, part of what we really see are over and over again kid-kid interactions that are difficult. And we still get a fair amount of disruption, but I want you to look at the difference. Middle schools, there's middle school. In middle school, by far and away, the higher proportion is non-compliance, insubordination. You know what it takes to be non-compliant? An adult. So part of what you've got is in elementary school, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do much better at teaching kids how to interact with each other, especially when they disagree. Second, we do not do a good enough job of teaching students how to interact with adults. We teach them to comply with our requests, but not to interact with us functionally. And when we don't do that, what happens in high school is they drop out. Skipping, tardy, truancy. These are your data as a state. So in part, I want you to take a look at that. These are your office discipline referral data by gender. So this is preschool, elementary, middle, high. And the green are girls, the blue are boys. So if you look, for example, at the lines in the second from the left, those are 202 elementary schools. Girls account for 20% of the problems, boys account for 80%. One of the best things you could do to improve the social behavior of the schools would be to eliminate all the boys. Okay? It would really. Now, what I want you to look at is as you go from middle to high school, see how the green creeps back up? So the girls become more disruptive. And part of what happens is the one area in California's data, the one problem behavior category that girls have that's greater than boys is dress code violation. And I presented this to a group of students once, and the young lady came in and said, yeah, but we have more ways of getting in trouble. So I don't know. Anyway, so those are some interesting things. If you look at where things happen, this is elementary school. So in elementary school, classroom and playground. Sound familiar? In middle school and high school, it's all classroom, right? If you look at time of day, the bottom is 15-minute blocks of time. 15-minute blocks of time through the whole day. This is elementary school. And what you see are things elevating until we feed them, right? And then things get a little bit better. Essentially, we aren't really fitting the circadian cycle of elementary kids. So if you are doing substitute teaching or you're coming in only for a portion of the day, come in either at the beginning or the end, but avoid the middle, all right? Middle school is a little different. It's like all day long, all right? And high school, remember truancy? So big at the beginning. Now, one of the things I also want you to focus on, and this is something we're going to come back to. Remember that focus on equity? PBIS, of the things that we do that are most important, I want you on a regular basis to be able to say, to what extent are we delivering discipline equitably across the ethnic groups of kids that we've got? And you've got different schools across Desert Mountain have slightly different proportions of kids. And it's easy to talk about the whole population, but what Swiss allows you to do is allows you to break out and ask the question, are we doing more discipline for one group than for another? And it's hard to do unless you actually look at the data. In this graph, the green bars represent the proportion of kids enrolled. So you can look and you can see for 96 elementary schools in California last year that were collecting Swiss data, there were approximately 54% of the kids were Hispanic or Latino. The blue bar represents, of all the kids who got an office referral, at least one, what's their ethnicity? So as a decision maker, as an administrator, if you're on the team, here's the rule. If the blue bar is bigger than the green bar, we have a discussion. And the greater the proportion of that difference, the more problematic it is. What I want you to really think about is, look at this subgroup. Even though African American kids accounted for a small proportion, the difference between their blue bar and green bar proportionally was substantive. That would be an area to focus. Middle school. I don't have enough data for high school. Part of what I want you to take away, PBIS is a way where we take ourselves seriously at looking at the systems. You in Desert Mountain, one of the mantras that I want you to take away from this whole event is using data for decision making. Not just to document compliance, to actually make us better. This is a way that you will do that. Now, one thing I want you to leave with your data, this is your rate of out-of-school suspensions. This is your out-of-school suspensions for the past 5 years in California. The top bar is the number of kids. The bottom set of bars are the number of suspensions, days of suspension. You are doing better at not expelling or suspending kids. Schools that are implementing PBIS are actually doing much better at that. Take that message back to your school boards. That's one of the most important themes that you're going to be able to take away. All right, so those of you who have been doing PBIS for a while, you have seen this triangle. You know this triangle. It's in several, you're going to see it, if you go to sessions the rest of the next little bit, you're going to see it a lot. So I want to keep a little bit in mind. There are 3 big things I want you to take away from the triangle. 1, invest in prevention first. Remember, the triangle always starts all green. 2nd, never one level of intensity, not just with behavior, but with math, reading, and writing too. And 3rd, early, rapid intervention. So part of what we typically do is we wait too long before we provide support. The 3 keys, positive behavior support, mental health, parent and family. If you're going to use the keys well, intervene quickly. With positive behavior support, everybody gets behavior support right from the beginning. But if you've got a kid who needs help, don't wait until the end of the year to do something. When I was a teacher, too often we'd start the beginning of the year, we'd wait until kids started to foul up around, October, November, then we'd have a meeting and we'd start the process, right? But then, amazingly, there'd be these holidays that got in the way. And so we'd sort of fumble along and then we'd have a break, then we'd come back in January and we'd gear back up. and we'd take a little bit more time and we'd have to adjust because the kid was a little bit different. Then we'd finally get something in place in February and March. That wouldn't quite work because Mary Ellen actually got pregnant and we had to do something else, and nobody, so we would get finally in April, we'd actually start running the program, but it wouldn't quite get in place until then finally in May or June we'd implement our real strategy, which was hope they get better over the summer. All right, that's a lousy way to run the circus. Here's what I want you to do. You know, at the beginning of an academic year, 75% of the heavy hitters. I want the high intensity, individualized interventions in place by Halloween. Got it? Write that down. 75% of the high intensity interventions are developed, implemented, and in full swing before Halloween. Now, if we do that, then we're actually doing multi-tiered systems. The trick is intervene early. Don't wait. Same thing for reading, same thing for math, same thing for writing. But I don't want you to get stipulated on one triangle. One of the things we want to emphasize, everybody who gets the yellow supports also gets the green. Everybody who gets red supports also gets the yellow. So this was a triangle structure that people came up with to emphasize that things are embedded. We also know that as you start moving up with greater intensity, it becomes less of a specific line than sort of a graduated line. We also really want to emphasize this fact that the whole idea of this multi-tiered piece works really well for academics as well as for behavior. The people in Colorado wanted to emphasize that it's cyclical, so they built a little circle in the middle. People in a different part of the country didn't like triangles, they liked pyramids. So you get pyramids. Then George came up with the thing about saying, look, not only do we have multi-tiered systems, but part of what we want to do is we want to integrate those systems into a single organizational framework. Laura Riffle taught us that when you focus on the behavioral side, if you do it well and you get the pieces, it will rotate and make it easy to add the academic portions. We can do it with slightly different colors. We actually also can break it apart. The mental health people wanted to break it apart. In Maryland, they said, well, you know, we're getting tired of triangles. You can do it lying down. All right, same basic idea. You can have arrows that go up. The early intervention people thought the lines were too harsh, so they wanted to make, you know, little fuzzy lines and do it not, you know. So this is one that's done in felt. You can put it in a circle and make it go. You can put it upside down. You can do it, you know, like triangles. We can do, you know, concentric circles. The other thing is you can say, look, for those teachers who are saying, look, this is the worst class I've ever had, come on, it's still a triangle, right? It still fits in there. And then, big issue is don't lock kids into this is the only level of support. It changes. So we were trying to say, how do you actually depict that? And we had, so here is the lava lamp version of the triangle with the bubbles going up and down. All right, so basically avoid some of the problems. Now, those of you who have been doing this for a little bit, don't fall into the trap of talking about green kids, yellow kids, and red kids. The triangle refers to us, not them. It refers to green supports that we deliver, yellow supports that we deliver, red supports that we deliver. So here's my man Juan, right? Here he is. And in his profile, he needs green level of supports for reading, yellow level of supports for behavior, red level of supports for math, and he does fine in terms of his basic self-help stuff. So is he green, yellow, or red? And the answer is yes. The real issue is don't let the triangle become yet another stigmatizing way of labeling children. Focus it more on the extent to which we are building environments that are effective. Now, some issues in terms of nationally where we stand. PBIS is currently being used in over 18,000 schools in the United States. 18,000. And it's being used in 44 of the states. It's also being used in Canada, Denmark, Belgium, Norway, Australia, New Zealand. So if you are really committed, I can give you all of the PBIS information in Norwegian if you want to do that, okay? If you look across the states, these are the states listed in a font that's too small to read from left to right alphabetically. And this is the number of schools per state. So there are over 13 states that have over 500 schools implementing. And California is actually one of those. All right? We also keep track of the extent to which we are scaling up PBIS. So to what extent, what's the proportion? Well, when you look at proportion, much smaller, right? Because you all have lots of schools. So there's lots of opportunity to grow PBIS within California. Now, if we do this well, one of the themes is that we should actually be able to see change in academics. Some of you are going to be here. Remember, I'm promising that PBIS will make schools more effective learning environment, and you want to hold us accountable to the data. So let me give you just a quick story. This is from Michigan. In Michigan, they call positive behavior support my Blissy. Everything in Michigan is a big M, little I, something, right? My something. It's like, you know, Apple is all I this. In Michigan, it's my this. All right, so Michigan started off. This is, for those of you who are geographically impaired, this is Michigan, all right? And the schools adopting PBIS started off initially being near each other, and then as they developed the coaching model, it expanded. I'm showing you this in part because if you talk about Desert Mountain is about the size of a country, all right, the geography. It's not bigger than Michigan. So you can do this. You can do this, all right? The thing I want you to really think about, though, is we implemented both effective behavior support and effective early literacy. These were elementary schools. These lines indicate the office discipline referrals per 100 students. So in each case, there's a cohort. So in the first year, there were 15 schools, and you can look at how the line goes down. See those 4 dots? That means office referrals went down with the first cohort. Then look at the middle 3 dots. The line goes down with an additional 19. Then look at the 2 dots on the right. The line goes down with another 34 schools. So problem behaviors decreased. Schools on the right that used PBIS had a 14.6% reduction. Schools that were matched and did not actually got worse. All right, but the big thing was when we looked at reading scores. And in this case, Michigan was the place where DIBELS, a oral reading fluency measure, was actually initially standardized. So as the state, it is very, very common for people to be using DIBELS, oral reading fluency for early literacy. What each of these bars do, cohort 1, cohort 2, cohort 3, cohort 4, see the little cohorts? We've now documented they implemented PBIS and their problem behavior went down. What I want you to look at is over 5 years, what percent of students in the school documented spring benchmark DIBELS standards as meeting benchmark. Now I want you to think, this is not one set of kids. This is 5 different years. What would you give to have the literacy competence of your entire school go up each year? Not just because the kids are getting smarter, but because you are building a more effective learning environment. Now come on, we're talking about 62,000 children, and they're getting better. Part of what I also want you to think about is, remember I talked about the multiple tiers? These are the kids at the top of the triangle for intensive literacy support. So not only did the proportion of kids meeting benchmark go up, the proportion of kids needing high intensity literacy support went down. And what we can look at, another way to think about it, and some people may not like DIBELS or progress monitoring tools. So let's take the state standardized tests. So here's a district. This is a school district, and we're looking only at 4th grade state standardized test scores. What proportion of kids in the district met the state standardized test scores? So there's the district standard for 6 years. Well, here's a story. So given that as the background, there was the little school that tried. And this is a school within that district. It was one of those schools that gets one of those labels, right? And the label is meant to be constructive and kind, but basically the label says, you are a miserable, lousy, rotten school, get better, right? So this was one of the schools. Look at the blue. So here you are. Think about being the blue school in the purple district. And year after year, everybody says, your kids did not score as well as everybody else's, right? Gets really old fast. Here's when they started implementing positive behavior support. And by the second year, they actually had PBIS in place, and they added early literacy in a multi-tiered framework. These were their scores. That's why I want you to implement PBIS. It makes your school a more effective learning environment. Now, one of the other issues, I'm going to move into, we've got about another 20 minutes, so hang in there. Some of the other pieces, I want you to make effective learning environments. I want the kids to really know what's going on. And when you do this, one of the things I'm worried about in PBS is too often we define behavioral expectations, but we don't actually teach them. So it's easy to come in and say, okay, be respectful, be responsible, be safe. And I actually was at a school that had read about PBS, said they were doing PBS, and they invited me to a place to come to their school to see what they were doing. And they brought all the kids into an auditorium that was not nearly as nice as this, and the administrator got up and said, okay, this year we will be safe, we will be respectful, we will be responsible. Dismissed. All right? That is not teaching. All right? So when you think about your behavioral expectations, keep them small enough that everybody can remember. The language needs to be there. Do not let the people in the English department who are Faulkner expertise build your expectations. Keep the expectations something that can fit on a button. Make it memorable, short, and always positive. But the thing I want you to think about, take a look at this. And this is the non-data part. This is like pure brainstem stuff. I want you to look up there and say, here's a school, and their behavioral expectations are be safe, be kind, be responsible. Now, I want you to actually think about walking into a school, either as a staff person, as an administrator, as a parent, or as a child. That's what the expectation is. Contrast that with what we typically see. Right? Think about the difference between welcoming and the idea of we're going to tell you what to do. Think about a school where you walk in and it says, in this school, we want to respect others, respect self, respect the environment. And think about the message that gives. Think about how you feel when you look at that. Contrast that with what we too often see. Look, here's the message. The old version of putting a banner up that says this is a bully prevention zone or this is a violence-free zone or something like that, those are not effective strategies for building social culture. You build social culture by defining what you want and actively teaching it. Make it fit the developmental level of the kids. Never select the behavioral expectations for a middle school or a high school without the active engagement of the children. They have a lot to say. Here's a middle school in Iowa, right? This is an elementary school. This is clearly an elementary school. this is a high school. The students were not only actively engaged in selecting the terms and the icons, they actually did the painting, which is why it's virtually illegible. All right? But I got to tell you, in one middle school, we taught the behavioral expectations, and 2 weeks later, I actually sent a bevy of graduate students in, and we interviewed the students. Remember, we did the part about was this useful or not, but part of what we said was, do you know what the behavioral expectations are? Do you actually know what they are and what it means? So the 3 questions we always ask is, do you know the expectations? Do you know what it means right here? And has anybody acknowledged you for doing things the right way in the past 2 weeks? Those are the questions we ask. In this middle school, 82% of the students could tell us the behavioral expectations. 82%. 82% of middle school students don't know what day it is. All right? So in part, I want you to define and to actively teach. This is from California, right? I mean, it has all of the stimulus properties of things getting better. You can do it in French. You can do it in Spanish. You can do it in any culture and context, but make it look like it's permanent. Make it look like it's something we're serious about. I would like to see it on the walls, on the windows, on the backs of the kids, on the folders, on the PA system. Basically, make it look as if this is what we're looking for in this context, in this school. Make it fit. Make it fit the developmental level of the children. Make it something that actually works. Here's a non-example. Don't do this. This is from a monument that a guy named Mark Shin sent us. It's a monument in Italy. And in Italy it said, it is absolutely forbidden to throw rubbish or to dirty the monument, to eat or to drink, to sit or to lie down on the steps, to climb up the seat or the banisters, to make noise, to have bad behavior, or to lead animals to smoke. All right, don't do that. Don't do that. This is from Maui, Hawaii, and it is, make it fit. So define expectations that match your community, your kids, your families, and actively teach. So if you do PBIS, you should be able to fill this out. You should be able to fill this out. And those of you who have actually gone through the training, this should have been one of the exercises that you either will or have done. I want you to be able to say, for the green, the primary prevention, what would we do? For the yellow, for the secondary prevention, what would we do? For the tertiary, the red, what would we do? Every session that you go to for the rest of this conference, I want you to back up and say, what level of prevention are we talking about? Where does it fit? So put things in place that'll actually work. Now, a couple of themes that I want to just end with. One is, I want to come back to this whole issue of bullying. And bullying is something that is particularly important for the students. About 30% of students identify themselves as either being bullied or seeing people being bullied on a regular basis. And there are 4 meta-analyses that have been done in the past 7 years. And they vary in numbers, so I'm picking something in the middle. But that's a lot. That's really a whole lot. And you have a real opportunity because Barb Kelly and Christy Close and Marie Williams are all very knowledgeable about the bully prevention strategies that we're finding to be effective. And we're finding things to be a little bit different in elementary than in middle and high, the way in which you go about doing this. But here's the common message. The old way of dealing with bullying was to try to identify, exclude, or change. The new way, much more of a PBIS way, says if you want to create a culture that decreases the likelihood of bullying, 1, teach everybody what being respectful looks like. And you may call it being honorable towards each other, but everybody needs to know this is okay and this is not okay. both physically and verbally. Everybody needs to be able to discriminate what is acceptable. The second thing, and here's the big deal, teach every single student in the school a signal that they could use. If somebody is behaving disrespectfully, how do you say stop? And again, you do that differently in elementary than you do in middle, than you do in high. But the difference is, it's not that I personally know how to do it, it's that we collectively have all agreed this is the signal for doing stop. In elementary schools, we oftentimes just do something like this. In middle schools and high schools, they don't like doing something that overt. They want something much more subtle and mature, right? Like this. Or so don't do that. I want you to take that out of the video. But the thing I want you to think about is make it fit the context. But I want you to think what I just did. What I just did was funny because it was too true. What we've taught as a culture is if somebody's disrespectful, you are more disrespectful back. Instead, I want you to teach, look, the message is, that doesn't work for me. Stop. Right? But if you do that, people also need to know, what do you do if somebody asks you to stop? Do you get embarrassed? Do you attack back? Do you swear and yell? Or do you simply say, hey, no problem, no big deal, back off? So if we teach these as skills, not just to the kids with problems, but to everybody. We all know what respect looks like. We all know that we are supposed to say stop if we experience or see somebody being disrespectful. And we know if somebody says stop to you, it's no big deal. You just take a deep breath and say, hey, here we go, right? No big deal. The other part, though, is we know that that's not always going to work. So everybody needs to know how you get assistance from adults. Now, there's a big difference between tattling and telling. Tattling is when you come up and say, Barbara's been mean, she was yelling at me, saying bad words, it was very bad, right? And then the adult calls Barbara over and says, Barbara, were you saying bad things to Rob? And Barbara says, look, we were just playing around, it was no big deal. What's, really overstated here. And then what happens is there's a huge amount of attention given to the deviant behavior. Look what happens if you're actually doing the stop routine. Barbara comes and says, Rob's being mean and saying bad things. The adult says, that's outrageous. How do you feel? Are you okay? Are you safe? Are you okay right now? Yeah, but I want you to basically eviscerate him. And then you say, well, but did you tell him to stop? Well, no, I want you to go and beat him up. Come on. And you say, well, sweetie, you have a responsibility to say stop. So let's practice you saying stop. Wow. But then say she comes back and she says, I said stop and the turkey didn't stop. He kept doing it. Then you call Rob over and you say, Rob, did Barb ask you to stop? And what I'd say is, oh, come on, we were just playing around, no big deal. Come on, she can handle that. Everybody does that. I'd say, look, did she say stop? Well, yeah, she says, but, I said, look, what do you do if somebody says stop? What about stop don't you quite get? Let's practice doing stop, right? You cut through all of that stuff and you keep coming back to, as a community, we have obligation to each other. All right, so part of what we've also learned, though, that works great in elementary school, middle and high school, students need to know how to recruit adult assistants, and they don't know how to do that well. 40% of kids who are in real need don't know how you ask an adult for help other than sort of walking up bleeding. Teach them a code. Teach middle and high school kids a code for asking for help. I want you to walk to an adult and say, I don't feel safe. And I don't feel safe is the word you say that will get my attention, and we'll go through stuff. And you can use whatever word fits for you, but give them a word and give everybody the same word. The other thing that we've learned is in middle school and high school, there needs to be an agreement about anonymity. If I come and tell you I've got a problem, I don't want you to go to Eric or to Eileen and say, Rob said you did this. Because at that point, I will get retribution that is far worse than everything else. So you've got to know that there are rules of engagement and how the adults will behave. When you build those in, you'll get real changes. Now, we've actually been doing bully prevention for about 7 years. And part of what we've done is we've looked at ways of teaching this basic program. Here are data from 3 elementary schools. In each elementary school, we identified 2 kids who were labeled as highly likely to engage in bullying behavior on the playground. So, first 2 kids, see their behavior. Second 2 kids, see their behavior. Third 2 kids, see their behavior. Now, for administrators, I want you to look at the slope of the line. See how the red line is going up? Inadvertently, we are doing deviancy training. Knock it off. Okay? When we introduced PBIS and we introduced the bully prevention program, there was a 72% reduction in the likelihood that these kids would engage in bullying on the playground. A 72% reduction. Now, the thing I want you to think about, the targeted students were never singled out. The targeted students were never taken aside and said, you are really a rotten person now, I want you to be better. They were simply part of the social culture. The reason this worked is because when we worked with the kids who were being bullied, the victims were much more likely to say stop, and they were much less likely to reward bullying behavior. The bystanders, people who were just watching, much more likely to say stop, and much less likely to say fight, fight, go, right? All of that supporting stuff. In essence, the reason that bullying went down was because we took away the social payoff for bullying. There are a dozen different ways of doing it. What we learned in middle school is that the middle school students needed much more convincing. We needed to make it fit their culture. So we always do forums before we start where we talk to them about, is this an issue? How would you recommend? What is a way to say stop that is socially acceptable? In Connecticut, for example, you don't say stop, you say enough. All right? And you do it in sort of a very suave way. I'm not quite suave enough. But anyway, all right? So you make it fit the context. So we just did a study in Oregon. These are unpublished data. All of the other data I've shown you have been published and peer-reviewed. This is a paper that we are currently writing up. This is 3 middle schools, and we kept track of the bullying behaviors, verbal and physical aggression, in a hallway outside of the cafeteria before implementing the program and after implementing the program. So part of what we were able to show, middle school students adopt and change these things. So the key message is, bully prevention can work. It involves focusing on the whole school. It involves moving into an arena that allows the kids to become much more effective at what they're doing. And part of what we typically do is we also collect, here's a very short survey that we typically collect. And when we initially look at what the kids do, we ask them, do you feel safe on a 1 to 5 scale? So here the average was 3.5. Now look at the next 2 bars. One is, are you treated respectfully? And the other is, do you treat people respectfully? See those? Look at the difference. For some reason, I'm shocked to tell you, middle school students perceive themselves as doing a great job and everybody else as really not treating them very well. All right, so basically the basic point is there are ways of using the data that make things fit and can make things adapt well to the overall format. Now, last thing that I want to do, I want to leave you with a few main messages, things to take and go forward. You've been very gracious and kind to be sitting through this long of a presentation. But one of the things, at this conference, use your time to define and take away at least one thing that you will be able to do and implement in your school soon. Take away ideas of ways in which you're going to be pragmatic. Don't just take big ideas, take away actions. Take away actions. And I want you to, the best action you could take away would be one of self-reflection. To what extent are we actually implementing PBIS? And is it working? Define clearly what you need before you launch into stuff. One of the things that Barb Kelly has taught us is it is a big mistake to launch into training before you know where you want to be and how you're going to get there. Don't think that training is the goal, and never do training without the coaching and the systems that will allow it to sustain. So if you put those in place, you're much more likely to get PBIS to really work. Define what you need from each other and define what you need from your administration. Of all the things, get more efficient at using your data. There are 4 sessions in the next part of the conference that actually deal with different elements of using data. This is about using data to get better, not just using data to tell if we've made if we have met a criterion. The thing that is critical about using data, and this is actually worth writing down, every time you ask the question, are we implementing either early literacy or behavior support? I want you to say, how do the data guide an action plan? The action is, what will we do next? Do not collect data that doesn't result in an action plan. And in fact, there is somebody driving around in California with this license plate. And I don't know who they are, but one of the people in our network saw them and sent us this picture. All right? We're going to find this person, right? And we're going to find out what data they're using. But their basic idea is, let's use the information to really make a difference. The themes that I want you to take away. PBIS is a way to identify the social culture that makes schools more effective learning environments. It is not just smoke and mirrors. It actually is core science. So there actually is a research base behind the things that we're talking about. But research without values is vacuous. So what we're really about is we're about making our communities more effective for a wider range of kids. Making the schools really responsive to the families, to the vision. PBIS fits perfectly within Desert Mountain's 3 keys because the 3 keys all come back to the same thing of building effective community. The vision is really one of not just forcing kids to behave well, but looking at ways in which we build the social relationships. We build the academic competence. We build the abilities of students, not just to work with us, but to work with each other. We link the skills of kids with the skills of families. We empower both children, families, and faculty. And when you do that well, you create a context in which PBIS can truly meet the needs of all kids in your district. Thank you very much.